Welcome to this pitch on the Spheres of Dialogue project of the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation, also called the CCHN, in collaboration with INALCO and the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. Spheres of Dialogue is a virtual platform that is made up by a community of practice of humanitarian frontline negotiators who come together to contribute to the response of COVID-19 in conflict zones. My name is Fiorella Erni. I am the responsible for our activities and our community in the Middle East, and I have with me the director of the CCHN, Claude Breuerlein.
Welcome, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. We're talking here about this sphere of dialogue because humanitarian professionals, those who negotiate on the front line, that is, will play a critical role in the vaccination campaign that we'll have next year. As you know, these frontliners have been negotiating access for years in terms of food, in terms of shelter, in terms of providing safety and security in conflict zones. So what we're doing here as Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation, which is a partnership between the ICRC, WFP, UNHCR, MSF, and HD, we're here organizing the auspices of a dialogue, a global dialogue and simulation on how we will negotiate access to the population affected by armed conflict during the COVID-19 vaccination campaign.
So Spheres of Dialogue, what is that? Let us show you a PowerPoint presentation how these Spheres of Dialogue will look like. We create a space where humanitarian frontline professionals can informally meet, learn, and exchange on current challenges around COVID-19. But we believe also that to tackle current negotiation challenges to implement a response to COVID-19, we need to broaden our horizon and break down the walls between professional disciplines. Therefore, the Spheres of Dialogue not only include experienced frontline practitioners from different cultural backgrounds, duty stations, organizations, and seniority levels, but they also include experts and scholars working on the most salient issues in the region. And they also include senior civil servants who are interested in deepening their understanding of the challenges of the negotiations in their region. So concretely, this is what we do. Humanitarian workers have been operating in conflict zones for decades and led through tough negotiations to reach people affected by war. The Spheres of Dialogue offer a space for these people to exchange about their challenges and their dilemmas in the field, but also exchange on best practices. Also, they offer a space to improve the theoretical knowledge about practical tools to prepare for negotiations. And finally, a space to learn to better understand their negotiation counterparts they will have to deal with.
So what we've been doing so far in terms of COVID-19, we have gathered over 300 to 400 practitioners from the field to exchange their experience currently under the pandemic, to understand better how the pandemic has affected the humanitarian response already undergoing, how new barriers have come up, the difficulties of negotiating with an increasingly militarized authorities, and to see how we can prioritize and systematize an approach related to the vaccination campaign that will take place next year. So we are organizing regular briefing sessions across the world where we have field practitioners now digitally coming in from deep field, taking part into briefing session on public health, on vaccination, on the circumstances in which these negotiations will take place, and then we see how we can build the capability of this committee of practice, which can over 1,600 negotiators at the field, how to build a capacity to engage in this negotiation.
We draw on real-life experiences, so the content of our workshops and courses and sessions is developed through focus group discussions, interviews, and exchanges with frontline negotiators. With our very new multi-agency and multidisciplinary approach, our community of practice has one common goal, and that is to learn from each other. And of course, to find practical solutions to current challenges that can be explored in discussion rounds or maybe simulation exercises.
So we made a very particular point to develop digital tools to build this connection between frontline negotiators. And we were Of course, as everybody else, we were quite affected at first with this changing environment, but with the digitalization of our activities through the use, of course, of Zoom and the Miro boards, we've been able to have much more participants joining us, particularly women, but also practitioners from deep field areas such as northern Syria, Gaza, northern Nigeria, Afghanistan, were able to connect and participate in this sharing of actual negotiation experience taking place at the field level. And we do have a large group of facilitators coming from the community of practice who facilitate this exchange of experience and distillate the content as testing new tools and looking into how we can bridge lesson learned from one context to the other.
This allows humanitarian frontline negotiators to share, for the very first time, a collaborative vision of frontline negotiation, and also to build relationships inside but also outside their organization virtually and in person, so that our humanitarian frontline negotiators are ready and equipped to assist and protect people in need and to fight the pandemic.
So where does this bring us? Well, we're planning early next year to organize the first global simulation on the negotiation of access for the vaccination campaign. The second week of March 2021, we will have a number of practitioners who will join us from the various contexts to share their experience and then to see how we can build on each other's experience and test a new protocol of access that will be put into place by these practitioners. We'll also hope to invite representatives of the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Interiors, and some of the key countries where we believe there may be some difficulties in terms of access to population affected by armed conflict. So what we would like to do here in this presentation is to be able now to answer some of your questions and see how we can mobilize interest, particularly for those working on humanitarian response as well as the COVID-19 vaccination campaign, and how we can bridge the interests of our community with the one of our group of professionals. So thank you very much. Let's see about the questions we may have. You want to talk about negotiation?
With pleasure. So we have a question. You speak about humanitarian negotiation. Would you mind explaining what you exactly mean by humanitarian negotiation? Excuse me. It is true that usually one would not necessarily associate humanitarian work with negotiation. But I have been in the field for several years, and I can really tell you all you do in the field is negotiate. You negotiate for access to bring food across front lines. You negotiate for access to be able to implement protection projects or to deliver medical assistance. All these are difficult negotiations we are leading with military authorities, with non-state armed groups, sometimes with civilian authorities. And once you break through maybe the authorities, then you have to negotiate with town elders, with community representatives, so that you can implement your projects. And this is what we call humanitarian negotiation. It means we negotiate in order to be implemented, to have a presence in the field and to implement our projects to assist and protect vulnerable people in need in conflict zones. And this is also what we are talking about. This is where we as frontline negotiators, we have an expertise in holding these negotiations, which will also be helpful when we think of a response to a pandemic.
There's a question here about why do we think vaccination campaign is particularly challenging, and as it would be in the case of COVID-19? Well, within the committee of practice, we have several dozens of frontliners who are currently conducting negotiation processes on vaccination campaign, being for measles, for polio, or Ebola, and we see patterns of difficulties arising, particularly in areas which are not under the control of the government. So we've heard yesterday, for example, from the representative of Gavi, engage into the COVAX initiative, there's a great initiative at the international level to ensure an equity in terms of distribution of the vaccine across the world. And it's a major challenge that we have already at the international level. But in many countries, the situation will not be so easily replicated in terms of equity. You are in a situation where you have the government who controls only part of the territory, and everything that crosses over the front line is seen as being politicized by both sides. So, and as we see, for example, in terms of food convoy or issue related to shelter, to health, water, that's where the humanitarian negotiator will have to play a very special role to say, how are we going to ensure that vaccination program will be deployed on the same level of equity standard that we expect at the international level in conflict situation where tensions are such that it's most likely that we will have obstacles. Where it becomes of relevance is unless and until population are properly vaccinated across the world, we will not have an immunization globally. So it is, as we saw for polio, for example, it is really until the last populations are being vaccinated that we will see a success in the fight against COVID-19. So we're already preparing ourselves that this responsibility will lie on humanitarian negotiators, and we want humanitarian negotiators to be ready to take on that responsibility. So for this purpose, in collaboration with Harvard University, we're developing a draft protocol of access to see that organizations can link up together and share their experience and way to build their capability and develop a straightforward protocol of access. In relationship with INALCO and other universities in the world, including American University in Beirut and other locations, we want to develop a field certificate on how to negotiate access in COVID-19 vaccination campaign, building on the experience of the Committee of Practice. We very much invite you to visit our website. It's the CCHN website, the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation, where you will find all the details of the current methodology being used by these frontline negotiators, and to see how we will build a bridge between current methodologies and see how we can build capabilities of frontline negotiators at the field level. There is also, yes, I see questions about workshop in Asia. So working with INALCO, we are developing a think tank, a series of think tank. We have one currently running in the Middle East, and we're planning one to run in Asia, particularly looking into the dimension of the response in Cox's Bazar, where you have over 1 million Rohingya refugees, as well as in Myanmar and in Afghanistan. So these are the focus of this think tank that will open in January of next year. Some example of best practices. Well, the main point here is most of the humanitarian community go to the field with a sense of empowerment and entitlement regarding access. This is great as we're talking about identity and value of the humanitarian action in terms of human rights, in terms of international humanitarian law. But when you get to the front line, to the really division of ideologies, the point of entitlements becomes moot. You need to develop the trust of the counterparts. You need to build the capacity of your organization to operate safely into the environment. And this is where we start to have difficulties. There is a misunderstanding. There are serious challenges and dilemmas of operating. And ultimately, negotiation is about compromise and how this compromise should be designed, managed, regulated. These are core issues that we meet in every domain of humanitarian negotiation. In the case of public health and the vaccination campaign, we already see that there are major tensions related to the requirement that a public health campaign is of a national dimension, that there are national plans for conducting a public health campaign. Well, when you work in a conflict zone where some part of the territory are not under the control of the Ministry of Health, we have a dilemma of legitimacy. everything coming from the capital will be seen as politicized, including the national public health campaign. And this has to be negotiated. But everything that is negotiated with a counterpart, any compromise made regarding this national plan and its legitimacy will again be seen as a compromise that is illegitimate or politicized. So how can we establish a sphere that's where we meet, a sphere of dialogue? How can we establish a sphere in which we can have discussion on the practical specificities of a vaccination campaign that can take place in places like northern Syria, northern Nigeria, many places in Afghanistan, and so on, and many places in Somalia. And this is what we will be working on.
Maybe if I may add to that, Claude, I think the question of legitimacy is always very important. I have been part of the Ebola response in Congo DRC, and we faced exactly this problem where the Ebola response is part of a national public response plan to the crisis. And then when you're not legitimate in the field, this may actually bring significant security risks to your team in the field. And this is also something we want to look at. What are the access protocols to make sure that the workers who implement the response to the pandemic are safe and they can safely operate in these areas without being attacked by communities or by armed groups? And safety and security is, of course, very close to our heart in these field operations.
So in terms of process, what we're heading to is starting from January, we will conduct interviews of field practitioners, government officials, stakeholders in many of the crisis areas in close collaboration with Harvard University, Kennedy School of Government. And then we will test the protocol that was developed so far in consultation with community members. As we're getting into February, we will be reaching out to a number of organizations, civil society organizations, NGO working on health, organizations that plan to be involved in the vaccination campaign in some of these fragile states, to invite them to join this simulation, and as well as Ministry of Health. What is important here in the simulation is that we have people who are ready to take some role, but from the perspective of other stakeholders. That's the purpose of the simulation. It's built around critical cases where we have experience on Ebola or on a measles campaign. We want to create a fictive case where all the stakeholders joining the simulation will take the role of another stakeholders to understand their perspective. And from their perspective, trying to negotiate the best compromise they can have. Following this first day of simulation, we'll have a second day of deliberation. Now people taking back their own role to engage into a deliberation about the protocol. This protocol of access, what are the best compromises? What are the challenges and dilemmas that we may expect? And how we're going to work together, and that's the key word, how we're going to have a collective wisdom to deal with these challenges over the years to come. Now, how to reach these professionals, it's something that we've been quite surprised over the recent months, especially since COVID-19, as we've seen our operation were fundamentally undermined by the pandemic. We used to have 1 to 2 workshops per week, reaching out to humanitarian professionals at the field level. Now we see that this community has moved online. We have digital operation now taking place in several areas of the world, where professionals continue to engage and have a dialogue on their practice. Recent experience in the Middle East, for example, has been quite promising in terms of the comfort zone that they have in engaging digitally. So you may want to mention that.
Yes, thank you very much, Claude. We actually managed this summer to organize for the very first time a peer workshop on humanitarian frontline negotiations for humanitarian staff members who are based in Northwest Syria. And what I found quite striking about this online event is that we had community facilitators who are based in Gaza to facilitate this workshop for community members in Northwest Syria. And we felt that this is really quite a breakthrough in how we can reach humanitarian workers who are indeed at the front line. And the digitalization of our activities has opened great opportunities to really reach humanitarian workers in very remote areas.
At the core of the CCHN methodology, there is this CCHN field manual on frontline humanitarian negotiations. So for the last 5 years, the CCHN has been conducting interviews and research on what are the current practices in their context. Because we all know negotiation is a highly personal, contextual, and also at times confidential experience. And that was what made this so difficult at first. Is there really a domain of humanitarian negotiation? But with building trust and through the partnership of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the World Food Programme, the UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, and Médecins Sans Frontières, we've been able to build sufficient trust for the practitioners to come forward and share the experience in their context. This experience has been accumulated, has been translated, and then organized in the context of this manual. The CCHN field manual is available online. It's open source document. You have to visit the CCHN website and you can download a copy. This manual is regularly updated. We currently just issued early this week the French version of the manual, and we have a Spanish and Arabic version coming soon. The manual provides not only the tools that have emerged from this practice, but also stories on which these tools are based that have been decontextualized, as well as pictures that you will see the negotiators in action. So that brings us toward the end of this presentation. So to summarize, the sphere of dialogue is a space. It's an informal space, and it's a digital space after COVID-19 hit us. This sphere is where we plan to have conversation on tools and methods of how we will negotiate access for vaccination campaigns in conflict areas, especially where government officials, Ministry of Health cannot deploy their operation. We know it will rely on humanitarian organizations, UNICEF, MSF, ICRC, WFP, and many others, and local partners for this deployment of operation. Then we will have a significant operation going on with this exercise on COVID-19 global simulation. For those who are interested, we will have a network session. My colleagues will give me the time of the session. Today, we have a network session on Zoom that will be put into the chat. For those interested to go into more details, I know some of you may be interested to participate. It's a global simulation organized in cooperation with Harvard University, INALCO, and of course, the partners of the CCHN. But it's open. We have the possibility to invite practitioners from the field who want to see how such a global simulation will be put into practice. It will take place this afternoon, I understand. Well, can you simply give me the time? Yes, at what time? 3:30. That's 3:30 Paris time. So this afternoon, 3:30 Paris time, and we will put on the chat the Zoom link. If you have any questions, you can also simply write to me into the chat, and I will reply with the Zoom link for this. I see, what is the road ahead of your initiative beyond COVID? Well, beyond COVID, this initiative is opening up and formalizing that space across these think tanks in the Middle East, in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe. So this sphere of dialogue is there to go beyond the isolation in which frontline negotiators are. Many do not have access to international fora, and I think Paris Peace Forum is a great breakthrough of having a digital forum. But we need to see how their experience of negotiating with the Taliban, with the Shabab, with the Houthi, the negotiation on the front line, this experience need to percolate up, because at the end of the day, this is where we say the rubber hits the road. Can we get the safe access to deploy vaccination, food, nutrition, shelter, water to millions of people affected by armed conflict? This experience needs to be harnessed. We need to break down the silos between agencies. We need to build trust around the professionals so they can share this experience and learn from each other. So our hope here is that with the global simulation, we can open up even more the sphere and invite more people to join. And with the digitalization of our operation, facilitate even more the participation of field staff, women taking part to these initiatives. And of course, allow also for the facility about language, because breakout rooms are into their individual, into the main languages in the region. So maybe you can talk about this experience.
Yes, of course. We have also managed, thanks to exploring technology, we have also managed to be able to organize, for instance, a workshop in English, but then break into smaller discussion groups where the discussion groups were in English, some of them, and other discussion groups in Arabic. And this helps us for two things. If we have workshops purely in Arabic and other workshops purely in English, we probably have the senior expatriate staff in the English-speaking workshop and people who are really at the front line in the Arabic-speaking workshop. By bringing the two languages together in one workshop helps us bringing senior level staff and frontline negotiators together in one workshop, but then they can exchange in their local language in discussion groups that to enhance their learning and really being able to express their experiences as well.
So if you want to know more about this global simulation, please join us to the network session we'll be offering on Zoom. If you don't have the link, you simply contact me on the Paris Peace Forum platform. We'll be happy to send you a link. And we very much wish you the best for this digital conference. It's a great opportunity to meet up and to reach out across our platform. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.